In late November 2001, deep inside Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, British Special Air Service troops launched the largest operation the regiment had undertaken since the end of the Second World War. 120 elite SAS operators were inserted more than 150 kilometers behind enemy lines. Their target was a vast Al-Qaeda-controlled complex in the remote southwest of the country. The site had been transformed into a fortified stronghold, protected by entrenched fighting positions, bunkers, and up to 100 armed fighters. The mission would unfold in full daylight. It would begin with a high-altitude, high-opening parachute jump into the Afghan desert, and it would escalate into a fierce ground assault supported by American fighter aircraft. This was Operation Trent. For more real-world military operations and detailed war documentaries, subscribe to the channel. In mid-October 2001, following the September 11th attacks, the United States launched its invasion of Afghanistan. The Taliban regime, which had provided sanctuary to Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, was now the primary target of the coalition's military campaign. British forces quickly joined the war effort. 2 squadrons of the 22nd Special Air Service Regiment were deployed into the Afghan theatre under the codename Operation Determinate. The SAS initially expected to conduct high-intensity combat operations against Taliban and Al-Qaeda forces. Instead, their early weeks in country were spent carrying out long-range reconnaissance patrols across the remote northwest of Afghanistan. These missions were largely unopposed. As the tempo of operations slowed, the 2 SAS squadrons were eventually withdrawn back to their garrison in the United Kingdom. For a brief moment, it appeared their role in the opening phase of the war had come to an end. But that would soon change. Following direct intervention by British Prime Minister Tony Blair, the SAS was assigned a far greater role in the conflict. Within days, the squadrons were ordered to return to Afghanistan, and on the 17th of November 2001, they received the first indication of what their expanded mission would involve. The briefing came directly from the British Ministry of Defence. Intelligence agencies from both the United States and the United Kingdom had identified a large industrial complex in the remote southwest of Afghanistan. On the surface, the site appeared to be a simple factory. In reality, it had been converted into a major Al-Qaeda facility. The compound was being used as a storage center for vast quantities of opium, a key source of funding for Taliban and terrorist operations across the region. But it was more than just a warehouse. Enemy fighters had transformed the area into a defensive fortress. Trenches had been dug around the perimeter. Bunkers and fighting positions were spread across the surrounding terrain. Up to 100 Al-Qaeda fighters were believed to be guarding the site. Within the broader mission of hunting down Osama bin Laden and dismantling Al-Qaeda's leadership, American commanders classified the factory as a low-priority objective. There were no known high-value targets believed to be present. The British assessment was very different. UK intelligence believed the complex could contain large amounts of documents, communications, equipment, and operational material connected to both the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, information that could prove critical to the wider war effort. British commanders pushed for a ground assault to seize the facility rather than simply destroy it from the air. After discussions with their American counterparts, approval was finally granted. The mission was assigned to the men of a squadron and G Squadron of the 22nd SAS Regiment. The operation was given a name: Operation Trent. Operation Trent was designed as a complex, long-range special forces assault deep inside hostile territory. It would unfold in 3 distinct phases. Phase 1, insertion. An 8-man reconnaissance team from G Squadron would be the first to enter Afghanistan's remote desert interior. They would conduct a high-altitude, high opening parachute jump from a United States Air Force C-130 Hercules aircraft. The team would land more than 150 kilometers from the target. It would be the first Halo insertion into enemy territory in the history of the SAS. Once on the ground, the team's mission was to secure and assess a temporary desert landing zone. They would test the firmness of the terrain to ensure it could support the weight of incoming transport aircraft. Only after confirming the area was suitable would they signal for the main force to be deployed. Phase 2, the assault. Following the successful establishment of the landing zone, the remainder of G Squadron, along with the squadron, would be flown in aboard 6 C-130 Hercules aircraft. In total, 120 SAS operators would be inserted directly into the desert. Their vehicles would be driven straight out of the rear ramps of the moving aircraft. The ground force would then form into a convoy and drive the 150 kilometers across open desert toward the Al-Qaeda compound. The assault itself would begin with a coordinated airstrike. United States Navy fighter aircraft, including F-18 Hornets and F-14 Tomcats, would carry out a preliminary bombing run on the target. The explosions would serve as the signal for the SAS to launch their ground attack. Phase 3, extraction. Once the factory complex had been secured, a squadron would collect any intelligence found on site. Documents, electronic equipment, and operational materials would be seized. The SAS would then withdraw from the area and return to the desert landing zone, where aircraft would extract the force before enemy reinforcements could arrive. But there was a major complication. United States Central Command could only provide air support for a limited 1-hour window. That window fell in the middle of the day. As a result, the entire assault would have to be conducted in broad daylight, removing the cover of darkness that special forces normally relied upon. It was far from ideal, but with the risk of the operation being cancelled entirely, the SAS agreed to proceed. In late November 2001, on an undisclosed night, the 8-man team from G Squadron boarded a United States Air Force C-130 Hercules transport aircraft at Bagram Air Base. The aircraft lifted off into the darkness and flew southwest for nearly 2 hours, deep into remote enemy-controlled territory. Far below them stretched the empty Afghan desert. At altitude, the rear ramp of the aircraft opened. One by one, the SAS operators stepped into the cold night air and disappeared into the darkness below. They descended under parachute toward a remote stretch of desert that had never before seen a British Special Forces insertion. This marked the first halo jump into enemy territory in the history of the SAS. After landing, the team immediately began assessing the ground. They tested the firmness of the desert surface, ensuring it could withstand the weight of heavy transport aircraft. Once the landing zone was confirmed as suitable, the team transmitted the signal for the main force to proceed. Approximately 14 hours later, the sound of aircraft engines echoed across the desert. 6 C-130 Hercules transports descended onto the makeshift runway in rapid succession. As each aircraft touched down, SAS vehicles roared out of the rear ramps while the planes were still moving. Land Rover patrol vehicles, dirt bikes, and logistics trucks were quickly unloaded. The aircraft lifted off again almost immediately to avoid lingering in hostile airspace. Several hours later, a squadron arrived in the same dramatic fashion. By the early hours of the morning, the entire SAS task force, 120 operators and dozens of vehicles, had assembled in the middle of the Afghan desert. Operation Trent was now fully underway. Shortly after 1:30 in the morning, the SAS convoy began its long journey toward the objective. The force moved out across the open desert, driving more than 150 kilometers through hostile territory under the cover of darkness. Dozens of Land Rover patrol vehicles led the way, supported by motorcycles and logistics trucks carrying supplies and ammunition. Partway through the journey, one of the Land Rovers suffered a mechanical breakdown. Unable to continue, the vehicle was forced to stop. Its three-man crew remained behind with the disabled truck, while the rest of the convoy pressed on toward the target. As dawn approached, the SAS reached their designated rendezvous point. From the high ground, the operators could see the Al-Qaeda complex spread out below them. The factory buildings, trenches, and defensive positions were clearly visible in the morning light. But almost immediately, the silence was shattered. Small arms fire erupted from enemy positions around the compound. Rocket-propelled grenades streaked through the air. Al-Qaeda fighters had spotted the approaching SAS vehicles and were now fully alert to the impending assault. Operation Trent had turned into a firefight. As resistance across the compound was brought under control, half of a squadron advanced toward the main headquarters building. British intelligence had identified this structure as the operational center of the facility. Teams moved quickly to secure all possible exit routes, preventing any remaining fighters from escaping. Moments later, assault teams breached the single-story headquarters compound. They stormed inside, weapons raised, expecting further resistance. But the building was empty of enemy fighters. Instead, they found something far more valuable. Rooms were filled with large quantities of paperwork. Electronic devices were scattered throughout the compound. Documents, records, and communications equipment connected directly to Taliban and Al-Qaeda operations lay abandoned. It was a significant intelligence haul, exactly what British commanders had believed the site contained. As the final pockets of enemy resistance around the factory were eliminated, the SAS began collecting every piece of material they could carry. Operation Trent had achieved its primary objective. By mid-afternoon, the mission at the factory complex was complete. Intelligence teams had secured all valuable materials. Enemy resistance in the area had been crushed. But new information soon reached the SAS commanders on the ground. Al-Qaeda reinforcements were believed to be moving toward the region. There was no time to remain on site. A squadron pulled back from the compound, regrouping with G Squadron at the edge of the complex. The SAS convoy then began the long withdrawal across the desert, retracing its route toward the temporary landing zone. As evening approached, the force reached the extraction point. United States Army CH-47 Chinook helicopters arrived first, landing in the desert to evacuate the 4 wounded SAS operators. They were flown to an American military base in Pakistan for medical treatment. Shortly afterward, C-130 Hercules transport aircraft returned to collect the remaining SAS troops and their vehicles. One by one, the aircraft lifted off into the fading light, carrying the task force back to Bagram Air Base. Operation Trent was over. The mission marked the largest SAS operation since the Second World War. It demonstrated the regiment's ability to conduct long-range desert insertions, coordinate with Allied air power, and assault heavily fortified enemy positions. More importantly, it delivered a major intelligence victory. The documents and electronic material seized at the factory provided valuable insight into Taliban and Al-Qaeda networks operating across Afghanistan. Operation Trent became one of the earliest large-scale special forces successes of the war. If you found this documentary breakdown valuable, subscribe for more real-world military operations and detailed combat histories. And let us know in the comments which operation you'd like to see covered next.